The Oscar-nominated documentary Time examines one family's struggle through incarceration, single parenting, and ultimately is a fascinating and heartbreaking and beautiful look at one family's journey. I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, and I'm here with the film's producers, Kellen Quinn and Lauren Domino. And because we're an award site, I always have to start here. So what was the experience that morning when you find out that you've been nominated for an Oscar? What is that experience like?
Well, thank you so much for having us, Tony. And it's much like this experience, like all of these experiences are just so surreal that you're like, when am I gonna wake up from this very detailed, prolonged dream that like for sure can't be my life, you know? So for me, the morning, I made the decision, anxiety management, shout out to years of therapy and personal work, that I wasn't going to watch live because it was just like heart would be racing too much. So I woke up to like a flurry of like text messages and phone calls and was in a state of suspended, like, wait, is this real life? Is this really happening? So then I just meditated and then I answered everyone's messages and phone calls. So not that, not, I don't think it's like, whew, it wasn't partying. It was just like, oh, let me really sit and ground in this moment. So yeah, I don't know if that's exciting, but it's exciting for me.
Ellen, what about you?
Yeah, well, thank you, Tony, for having us. And for me, it was a bit different, except for Lauren was smart to know to manage her anxiety. I mean, it is like a really nerve-wracking thing to be watching and waiting, and because it's alphabetical in terms of how they announce each nominee, we were the fifth of five. And so, having gotten through those first four, it was kind of like, who knows, anything, could be any of the remaining films. So there was a lot of joy in that moment. I was at my dear friend's house, Dan Janvey, who's a co-producer on Time and also produced Nomadland, which was nominated for a number of things that morning as well. And yeah, my girlfriend was on FaceTime with us under strict orders from Dan that she could not be watching in case our stream lagged. So we needed to not hear it from anybody else. It had to be direct from our stream. And yeah, we were drinking coffee and then mixed in the champagne shortly after. And I don't think I've felt so jittery for the rest of the day that was the probably most jittery day of my life, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is so fascinating about this film is that it's such as I was watching it, it's such a hard film to categorize, which I think is one of the great things about the film is that it is so many different things. It's about so many different things. How do you, to people who haven't seen it, how do you explain the film to people?
It's always really challenging, I think, to convey what I actually think the film is and does. And so, but I think that the way I try to explain it is kind of to get at something of the emotional experience of watching it, which is kind of, I think, the core of how Garrett conceived of it and put it together along with our editor, Gabe Rhodes. And so, of course it has these themes, these topics: mass incarceration, institutional racism, the way that both of those things affect families, and the rich family in particular in this film. But I try to sort of mention all those things and then shift into explaining that it's also an exploration of the emotional experience of time in all the ways that you could imagine, and that the kind of poetry of it is completely intrinsic to trying to convey something of Fox's experience, of Rob's experience, of their boy's experience, the kind of flow between past, present, and future. And I think that, it's a sort of futile thing to just think you can convey it all in words, because so much of the film's power comes from Garrett's kind of sense of how to convey that through cinema. And so it's a film for a reason instead of an essay. But yeah, I always try to sort of gesture at least towards the poetry of it, the experiential element, as a really important way of exploring these very weighty themes, and also the very important theme of love and joy, which really resonates through the whole film.
So we can't talk about this film without talking about Fox, because she is she's so captivating. Not just because of her story, but there's just something about her that just commands your attention. And she is so many things. And one of the things I love about the film is that she is such a full-bodied person, in terms of, she's both like kind of like a sinner and a saint, and a mother and a wife, and all of those things go together to make this really compelling portrait. Lauren, when you first were exposed to Fox, I mean, what attracted you to this story at the beginning?
I mean, I think you can tell in the film that she's just so incredibly dynamic and inspiring. And when you're in a room with her, you're immediately drawn to her, right? There's certain people that their light shines so brightly that everyone just becomes like a moth and like wants to get closer. And, with Fox, it was just like, oh, wow, you are so authentic, right? You exist in the fullness of your experience, no punches, like across the board. And it was like that when you first meet her, and what translates on camera is just fully Fox, because there's no, that level of like artifice of just like, that's not there. She's like, this is all of me, and it's important to share all of me so people can connect to my story, can connect to my fight, can also like be inspired to live with this bit of passion. So that exists from the moment you see her. And I think to experience it on film is just like experiencing it in real life. It's that powerful. Yeah.
Are you guys able to, when you, this is such a personal story, and so much of it is told through her home movies and this archive of footage that she has, do you become emotionally invested? And does that emotional investment make it difficult as filmmakers and producers? Are you able to separate that from the film you're trying to make?
I think do you want to take it, Kellen, or I can start? I think that it's a mix of both. Like when you are with the family every day, you're like, oh my gosh, a big thing that I talk about in this film is like the level of hope that Fox has, and like faith and certainty that I will say that when I started working on this film that I did not have to that degree. So you're invested if like, I really want this to happen, but as a producer, you're like, what if it doesn't? How do we deal with that? And I think that Fox really inspired me through the course of this to like have that level of faith, like trust that everything was going to work out. But it is a really interesting web to manage of like, you're emotionally invested, but you're pulled back because you also want to tell a story that's full, right? That's like, I can tell a story about like your family that may touch on details that you wouldn't because they're your family, right? So you have to have that level of perspective. But at the end of the day, like we're filmmakers, but we're also human. So you have that level of emotional connection. For me, watching the film in theaters with an audience, the emotional impact really like was a gut punch, because you see it so many times in cuts and you sort of lose that, and then you see it again with people for the first time and you're like, wow, I'm a part of something really special that people are emotionally connecting to. And I think that that's the most you can hope for when you like work on anything, is that people emotionally connect to something that you're involved in. So that's my perspective. Kellen?
Yeah, no, I think that really gets at what's essential. The only thing that comes to mind that I'd add is sort of the way that emotional investment is essential to making films, documentaries included, and that can really be a guide sometimes through those periods where things are pretty murky and unclear in terms of what's going to happen. So I think that yeah, there's a way in which emotions can sometimes cloud our judgment, but I also think that feeling deeply and sort of using that sense of intuition is really, really important to make authentic work, to make work that has integrity, and to remain connected to the people who appear in documentaries. So to me, the emotional investment is largely beneficial.
It's interesting. You both talked about Garrett Bradley, the director, and I'm curious as to, this documentary could have been told so many ways, and I think the way it is told is so beautiful and haunting with all the black and white, and that what was the relationship? How did you work with Garrett?
Well, I think, I love Garrett, and I think that she's brilliant and, one of the best filmmakers of all time. And I just implicitly trust her and her vision. And that's the way that I work with Garrett, is that there's such a deep level of trust. And from the beginning, Garrett was like, okay, this is dealing with like these certain elements. It's dealing with memory, how we feel memory in our body, right? Like, if you think of something from the past, it feels very present in your body. And how does that translate into a film? So just like, being in conversation with her of her thoughts and what she wanted to see, and just fully trusting her vision, is the way that I work. And I think that's the way that most people work when you have the privilege of working with an amazing director.
I'm curious.
I feel like Kellen should answer.
Kellen can jump in too.
Yeah, I think working with Garrett is a privilege and an honor, and it's a working relationship that has to be based on trust. I think all the best ones are. I think that Lauren mentioned translate, and I think that's often how I feel like I work with directors in general, and certainly with Garrett, of like trying to, in a way, learn her language and then find ways to translate that to other people who don't get to be present with her as regularly, as frequently, with the same kind of depth, because really there needs to be a way to bring a whole group of people together to share a language. And sometimes, that work feels like being an interpreter in between. Not that people fundamentally don't understand each other, but sometimes you need that person to kind of like make the quick connection that otherwise just takes too much time and makes it impossible to achieve things. So I think that's a sort of specific element of how I feel like I work with Garrett, and it's really fun. I think that's one of the things of like, I've always loved language, and so getting to be in the role of the translator interpreter to me is like incredibly fun.
This film, since its debut, really has captured a number of critics' prizes and audience prizes, and I'm just curious as to what, from your side, what do you think it is about this film that has resonated so much?
I think you hit on it earlier when you talked about emotional connection. I think that people watch this film and feel deeply connected. I believe that, it allows them to see parts of their lives and connect with people in ways maybe they didn't expect. And I think especially, I think the universe and timing of things works really well of like people film about like loss and connection, and it comes out in this time in which we all feel that, so deeply. And I think that people really connected to that, and they connected to this inspiring story. And I think in a time where things feel really bleak, it's always good to have hope. And I think that this is a film that's so hopeful and like leaves people like believing in the possibility of like good and dreams coming true. And it's not fiction, you know? And I think that we all just like from an emotional place, there's like the artistic cinema level of it that's brilliant, but from an emotional place, I think to have something that instilled a little bit of hope, a lot of bit of hope, was really powerful and helped people connect.
And so many people, I think, assume frustratingly often that a story that deals with incarceration, with a Black family, you know, kind of contending with the carceral system, is going to be a story that either feels like homework or a kind of history lesson or something. And it is, you know, it's a film that speaks about history, that speaks about systemic racism and injustice, but at the center of it is something that transcends that. That's not about just sort of neither facts and figures nor kind of the kind of tropes of suffering. It's also about joy and about love. And it is like, I still get extremely emotional when I get to the end of the film. Like there is, when I first watched the kind of rushes from that moment and spoke to Garrett, I said that like, I don't think I'd ever witnessed something in a documentary that had that feeling. This was before she'd really even edited anything. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that undoubtedly is connected to the way that people are responding to the film, that feeling.
It feels in many ways like almost like a living history of this time that we're all going through. It's just a beautiful piece of work, and congratulations on the Oscars and all of the awards that have been coming your guys' way. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Oscars, and stay tuned for more interviews throughout the season. Lauren Domino, Kellen Quinn, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.